For today's perspective, we're staying with the main news of the ongoing crisis in Israel and Gaza. We're going to try to answer many of the more in-depth questions you have about the terrorist attacks in Israel, the background of Hamas militants that are behind it, what other groups are supporting the fighters, and why now? What are the key triggers behind it? Well, Dr. HA Hellyer is with us. He's a Middle East affairs specialist for Carnegie, the international affairs think tank. Dr. Hellyer, thank you for coming on the programme. You're in Amman this morning, which Jordan shares a border with Israel. A lot of people watching this, I suspect, are in shock this morning at the continuing developments. Just give us a sense, your assessment of the current situation. We're hearing about IDF with 100,000 troops amassing on the border. How do you see it right now?
Well, good morning. I think the fact that you see this increase of massing of tanks and personnel on the border is very clear. I think it's extremely likely we're going to see a ground invasion and incursion into the Gaza Strip by Israeli forces. I frankly think that's inevitable at the present moment. The concern is then what happens thereafter. There's, of course, an incredible desire within the Israeli wider politic to inflict a reprisal, a response to the attacks of the weekend. And I think that that's exactly what they're intending to do. The issue is, of course, Gaza, as you know, different Israeli officials themselves have said, is an open-air prison. So to targets in Gaza without widespread civilian casualties, I think is incredibly unlikely, and we've already seen that over the last couple of days, and we've seen that in previous incursions and invasions of Israeli military forces into the blockaded strip. And there's really nowhere for people to go, right? You know, when Israeli officials say that Palestinians should flee or go away from, you know, these intended targets, there's nowhere for them to go. And I think that different human rights organizations, Israeli, Palestinian, international, are very concerned about what the fallout is going to be of such a reprisal.
And it comes at a time, the attack, 50 years on from the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was surprised in an attack from Syria, from Egypt. Does that tell us part of the reason about why now? Could you bring in some of the other thoughts and your perspective of what it was about this moment, the time to attack?
Well, it's symbolically very significant, of course. The 1973 October War was a very significant one in terms of Arab-Israeli relations. The final consequence of that war was the return of the Sinai to Egyptian control. And, you know, that's obviously etched in the memory of the region. So there is quite a significant symbolic value in terms of this particular day, 50 years on. I think there are other things, though, and there are two things in particular. One that's, you know, quite long-ranging, one that's a little short to medium term. The long-ranging one is that, of course, as, again, Israeli analysts themselves have been pointing out for quite some time, the situation in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank, the situation in the occupied territories is not sustainable, and Israeli politicians have not focused on resolving that particular conflict. On the contrary, they've been trying to, quote unquote, shrink it. They've been trying to minimize it, talk of economic dividends, but not political ones. And they've been preferring to focus their attentions on normalizing with Arab states that they're not at war with and have not been at war with. So there's that aspect there that, you know, if the situation was going to be left like that for too long, then, you know, there was going to be some sort of crisis that would erupt. I'm not saying it had to be like this. I'm saying that it's untenable for the situation to simply continue in that direction. The second, which is linked to what I just said, is that there has been talk in DC, in Saudi Arabia and in Israel of the possibility of normalization between the Israelis and the Saudis. And I'm not sure that this was, you know, a direct response to that. I think it was one of the factors, however, involved where Hamas and the network that supports it is trying to send a very clear message that, look, you can't forget about this particular issue. You can't simply normalize. The situation has not changed, and we're going to drag you back into this kicking and screaming. And I think in that regard, there has been an impact. I'm not sure if the normalization process is dead or over, but I think it's certainly going to be put into suspended animation for a little bit of time because the dynamics have completely changed now. The de-escalation paradigm that has characterized the last years, I think that that's changed.